Nintendo. Oh, Nintendo. We love Nintendo. We hate Nintendo. Nintendo have given us some of the greatest video games of all time, and other times they've been destroying content creators like no tomorrow. They hate emulation, and they hate the idea of backing up games. Yet, even though they're on the goldmine of their games, they still refuse to release them on their modern systems. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about a system that I don't really care for at the moment, and yet everyone else seems to love it. Yes, it's the N64 from the 1990s. Let's talk about it. Hello, folks, welcome back. Yes, the N64. Now, I'm going to put this straight to you right now. I don't dislike the N64. I respect the N64. It has got some great games that I would be interested in playing, and more importantly, it's still a good console. Yet, why don't I want it? Why don't I talk about it? And should I be changing my mind? Let me tell you why I don't personally care for the N64 right now, but again, I'm open-minded, my mind could be changed. When I grew up in the 90s, I played PlayStation. Specifically PlayStation and nothing else. In the early 2000s, I went to PlayStation 2 and I played PlayStation 2 for a long time. But one thing did happen in that time that did change. I got the Game Boy Advance. I absolutely love the Game Boy Advance. Now you see, back in the day, I was very young, so I couldn't play on the PlayStation whenever I wanted, but I loved games. So my dad thought of a compromise for me and my brother. My brother got the Game Boy Advance back in 2002, and a year later, because I loved it so much, I got my own in 2003. The great part was, me and my brother used to play the same games together, so we could use a link cable and play together and try and, well, fight or play Pokemon or do racing games, all sorts. And we had all kind of games in the day, you know, Dragon Ball Z, Super Sonic Warrior, Sonic Advance 2 and 3, the Pokemon games, I mean literally all of them. We had all sorts of titles to play. I remember Golden Sun, Advance Wars. Oh my word! We had a few tiny games like 007, Everything or Nothing. My brother had Final Fantasy. I had Sonic Battle. It was just a great time to be alive. And of course, that was my first Nintendo experience. Some years later, in 2007, we got the Wii, and I loved the Wii. Although most people don't like the Wii today, I absolutely loved it, and my brother loved his as well. I loved it more than him though. I used to play the Wii all the time. And then once I got into Smash Bros. Brawl and Resident Evil 4 on the Wii, oh, you could not get me away from that console. And the good news was, by the time I got the Wii, I was old enough to play the games whenever I wanted, so I was easily able to play games after school. And I started to buy all sorts of Wii games to play, and I could not get enough of that or the PS2. My love for Nintendo started a bit late, but I like the company, I like their games. I don't like every game, mind you, but I do like Nintendo, and they have got a great selection of games that I absolutely adore. Later in years, so we're talking about the 2010s now, I got back into the GameCube, and I had played it before at a friend's house and even at school when we used to be able to bring game consoles over during the later part of the school year. I remember playing on the DS, the 3DS especially. I owned the 3DS for a while and I loved that as well, mostly for Pokemon though. And of course, I've gotten into the Super Nintendo. I love that thing. I love my Super Nintendo. Great system. And I've even got it emulated. That's how much I love it on my Steam Deck. So, Nintendo as a company, I like their systems, and I'm getting into their systems in a retrospective form. So why am I not showing the same love to the N64? There's a few reasons why, and although some of them can be solved today, it's still a pain in the backside. So the console comes in cartridges. So cartridges are great because they have fast load times, but they're more expensive to buy in terms of buying games, and there's no CD quality anything for the most part. I know that that in its of itself isn't a problem. There's a lot of great games that I've played that didn't come on CD, so why does it matter? Well, it matters because for me, it's not the audio, it's more the space. If an N64 game was ported, say from PlayStation or Sega Saturn, it was almost always compromised in some way. If it wasn't by visuals, which, I mean, it was as well, but not always, it was always by sound design and, of course, by removing content. So an easy one is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater for PlayStation. That was fully fledged. It had CD cutscenes, CD audio. It had a lot of great visual aesthetics, and of course there was no fog at all. On the N64 version, the visuals were pared back a little bit, and the draw distance was less. A lot of the CD graphics were missing. There was no cutscenes. The CD audio, although it did make it to the N64, was cut and looped, and very few songs were played out in their entirety, and the ones that were heavily compressed. It was stuff like that that made the N64 for me not the most desirable console. And of course, the console only shipped with composite and S-video, and it had its mega famous anti-blur technology with the anti-aliasing, which made everything look so blurry. And unfortunately, I'm not a fan of blurry graphics, and I don't just mean from composite. I mean, once you go from that to S-video or RGB, you know, the idea of, say, like a flicker filter, for example, in later systems, I just can't stand those. I hate systems that blur things on purpose for no reason. I know on a CRT it makes it look smoother, and perhaps there I would appreciate the graphics a lot more, but on modern displays, when you're trying to upscale them, it just looks terrible. Now, yes, I'm well aware you can get anti-blur mods now. You can get the RGB SCART mod, you can get anti-flicker mods and all sorts of things, and you can sharpen up the graphics in a considerable way on N64, so you can still get much better graphics now if you are willing to invest in a lot of money. But even so, the N64 graininess is still there. It's still foggy, and it just doesn't look that appealing. That being said though, I have seen videos where the 2D games look spectacular, and games that take full advantage of the N64's architecture look wonderful. And more importantly, you can get the EverDrives now where, and I'm not sure if this is true or not, so someone will have to let me know, but you can get EverDrives now which allow you to play much better audio than what the N64 could do. Again, I don't know if that's true. It's true on the Super Nintendo. Don't know about the N64, but if it is true, oh, that fixes another problem straight away. The N64 is not a console that you can be sniffing at. Oh, and of course, that controller. Yeah, you know that controller that you have to hold like this or like this? That three-pronged controller with all the various buttons on it and that single analog stick? Don't know, just I've tried that before. I've actually played it. In fact, I played it when I went to Insomnia, and I still am not a fan. Now, yes, you can get an adapter for the N64 and you can use whatever controller you want. The problem is most games are designed with the N64 in mind. Therefore, if you try a different controller, you may lose functionality, or you may lose the ability to have certain buttons where they should be. The N64 for me is just a device that, although I understand and respect its legacy, and there are some great games that I would like to play myself, most of the games you can either play on PlayStation or Sega Saturn or Dreamcast or anything else, or if you can't play the games on another device, you can just emulate it. Although, mind you, if you use emulation, again, the button configuration will have to be changed because the N64 had more buttons than most controllers. So you can see, even with emulation, although it works beautifully on Steam Deck, for example, it's still not an optimal experience. Will I ever get an N64? No, maybe. The problem is, a good one costs £100, well, £70 to £100 these days. And don't get me started on the rare ones that cost £200 plus. Also, if I was to get an N64, I would want it to be RGB modded, but the problem is, unless you get a very early console, the RGB mod is very expensive. And yes, I know you can get those HDMI adapters, but they just look terrible for the most part, and they still only use up to S-video, and you still need to use the hacks to make the device to look better. Really, I need to spend at least £200 on getting an N64 with an RGB mod, you know, especially a new current iteration of it, not just a basic one. And then I'll have to get the RGB SCART cable, and then on top of that, I'd have to get an EverDrive, because N64 prices these days, especially in a box, are blooming expensive here. Straight away, I'd have to spend at least £300 just to get an N64 that I would be happy with. And the problem is, I don't need to spend so much on a Sega Saturn or a PlayStation or PlayStation 2 or anything else for that matter. So it's quite ridiculous. I'm well aware there's a lot of great N64 games that maybe I would like to play, but right now I just can't justify the cost, you know? That's about a third of my wages each month, and that's a lot. And of course I'd have to research which games are worth it, which games to play, and perhaps maybe actually, guys, because this video is a reason why I don't buy N64 yet, besides emulation of course, perhaps you folks could tell me which games I should play in the comments below, because you guys know more about the N64 than I ever will. And more importantly, you guys could help me in getting the best N64 for the price with all the mods that I personally want to get the best experience possible. I already know when it comes to the cables, retro gaming cables here in the UK are my go-to source, and they will have plenty of N64 choices for me, especially when I get one that's modified. These are my thoughts on the N64. Why the hell I haven't got one yet, and if I ever will get one. Maybe you guys can help me, who knows? If you guys are willing to donate an N64 that you don't want anymore to me, maybe we can arrange this? Who knows? No, that's asking too much. Don't do that. Don't do that. Keep the N64. It's a great console, I'm sure. Anyway, you folks let me know. What are your thoughts on the N64? Did you have one growing up? What are your favourite games for it? Should I get one? And if I do, what game should I play for it? Let me know, and I will see you next time.